Suffering is at the core of the human experience. It is the thread that ties our joys, fears, triumphs, and failures together. For Fyodor Dostoevsky, suffering was not just an inevitable part of life. It was essential for understanding the human condition. This is not an easy perspective to embrace, but it's one that Dostoevsky explored relentlessly through his works and personal life. In his view, suffering reveals truths about ourselves that we might otherwise never confront, and in that confrontation, we find meaning. Dostoevsky's own life was steeped in suffering. Arrested for his involvement in a political group, he was sentenced to death at the age of 28. Moments before his execution, he was pardoned and sent to Siberian exile instead. Imagine standing before a firing squad, knowing that your life is about to end, only to be told that you'll live, but at the cost of years in a labor camp. This harrowing experience shaped Dostoevsky's understanding of the human spirit. He saw that the very edge of despair often reveals what truly lies within us. It was during this period that Dostoevsky began to wrestle with one of the most profound questions of human existence. Why do we suffer? And what can it teach us? His characters grapple with these questions, offering us a mirror in which we might see our own struggles more clearly. Through his writing, Dostoevsky invites us to not just endure suffering, but to probe its depths, to understand its role in shaping who we are. Take his insight. Nothing is easier than to denounce the evildoer. Nothing is more difficult than to understand him. This idea challenges us to reconsider how we view morality and judgment. Dostoevsky believed that understanding, even of those who commit terrible acts, is more valuable than condemnation. In Crime and Punishment, Raskolnikov, the protagonist, commits murder but is not portrayed as a one-dimensional villain. Instead, Dostoevsky delves into his psyche, revealing his internal torment and justifications. We see a man grappling with his own humanity, caught between his intellect and his conscience. By the end, we understand that Raskolnikov's punishment is not the Siberian labor camp, but the psychological suffering he endures as he confronts the weight of his actions. This is where Dostoevsky's brilliance lies. He forces us to see ourselves in his flawed characters. He challenges us to ask, could I have done the same in their place? What circumstances might push me to the edge of morality? In doing so, he shifts the focus from judgment to empathy. It's a stark reminder that the line between good and evil does not run between people, but through every human heart. And yet, Dostoevsky didn't romanticize suffering. He acknowledged its brutal reality, but he also believed it had the potential to transform us. Consider his assertion: love in action is a harsh and dreadful thing compared to love in dreams. To truly love someone requires sacrifice, vulnerability, and the willingness to confront pain. It's easy to dream of love as something idyllic and pure, but in practice, love often demands that we confront the ugliest parts of ourselves and others. In The Brothers Karamazov, Father Zosima tells us that true love is found in deeds, not feelings. When we love in action, we must grapple with imperfection, both in ourselves and in those we care for. This kind of love can be a source of profound suffering, but it is also where we find meaning. It's through this lens that Dostoevsky viewed human relationships, not as a source of perpetual happiness, but as a crucible where our souls are tested and refined. This brings us to another of his observations. The more I love humanity in general, the less I love man in particular. On the surface, this might seem cynical, but it captures a deep truth about human nature. It's easy to idealize humanity as a concept. After all, it's abstract and distant. But when we're faced with the messy reality of individuals, with their flaws and idiosyncrasies, our lofty ideals often crumble. Dostoevsky understood that genuine connection requires us to see people as they are, not as we wish them to be. And that, again, is where suffering plays its part. It is only by confronting the discomfort and disillusionment that comes with real relationships that we can learn to love truly. This idea is further explored in Dostoevsky's exploration of freedom. One of his most thought-provoking statements is, "The best way to keep a prisoner from escaping is to make sure he never knows he's in prison." On the surface, this might refer to literal imprisonment, but Dostoevsky's intent is far more profound. He believed that most people live in a kind of spiritual or psychological prison, confined by societal norms, fear, or even their own desires. In Notes from Underground, the narrator is a man who has rejected society and lives in isolation, but his rebellion has not freed him. Instead, he is consumed by bitterness and self-loathing. This paradox is central to Dostoevsky's philosophy. True freedom comes not from rejecting constraints, but from confronting and understanding them. When we recognize the prisons we've built around ourselves, whether they are habits, beliefs, or fears, we gain the power to transcend them. But this process is not without its costs. Dostoevsky himself admitted, "I gave up caring about anything, and all the problems disappeared." There's a seductive simplicity in apathy, in choosing not to engage with life's complexities. But Dostoevsky saw this as a kind of death, a way of avoiding the very struggles that make us human. His characters often wrestle with this temptation, teetering on the edge of despair before finding, or failing to find, a reason to keep going. One of the most poignant examples of this struggle is found in The Idiot. Prince Mishkin, often seen as a Christ-like figure, is deeply empathetic and unconditionally kind, yet his goodness isolates him, as the world around him views his purity as foolishness. Mishkin's suffering is not the result of malice or guilt, but of his inability to reconcile his ideals with the harsh realities of the world. Through him, Dostoevsky poses a haunting question. Is it possible to remain good in a world that seems designed to break us? And yet, Dostoevsky does not leave us without hope. Even in the depths of despair, he believed in the possibility of redemption. Suffering, he argued, has the power to strip away illusions and reveal what is truly important. In Crime and Punishment, Raskolnikov's ultimate redemption comes not through avoiding suffering, but by embracing it. His confession and willingness to atone for his crime mark the beginning of his spiritual renewal. This is perhaps Dostoevsky's most radical idea, that suffering is not merely a curse to be avoided, but a teacher to be embraced. It is through our pain that we come to understand ourselves and our place in the world. It forces us to confront our weaknesses, our fears, and our capacity for both good and evil. And in doing so, it opens the door to growth and transformation. At its heart, Dostoevsky's philosophy is one of radical honesty. He urges us to look at life and ourselves without flinching, to face the truths we would rather avoid, to confront the suffering we would rather escape, and in doing so, to discover the meaning and beauty that lie on the other side. His words, "I'm a master of speaking silently. All my life I've spoken silently, and I've lived through entire tragedies in silence," reflect the profound introspection that characterized both his life and his work. Dostoevsky understood that much of our suffering is internal, born in silence and often invisible to others. But he also believed that this inner struggle is what makes us human. It is where we find our strength, our compassion, and our capacity to love. In the end, Dostoevsky's message is not one of despair, but of resilience. He challenges us to see suffering not as an obstacle, but as a path, a difficult and often painful path, but one that leads to deeper understanding and, ultimately, to freedom.